The story of the Nolan Farm, told to you by the guy. There was a farm in rural Indiana. I don't remember the exact county, but I was there, and I seen it with my own eyes, and I have several witnesses in my family and friends. Now, this story begins sometime in the early 1950s. My grandmother was a young teenager looking for a job, and somebody knew a house that needed cleaned on the weekend. That farmhouse was the Nolan Farm, and the owner of that house was Vern Nolan and his family. Vern, they say, was a strange man who the only thing he hated more than other people was God. In fact, many people would witness that sometimes after a rain that had rained on his fresh-cut hay, or some other minor inconvenience with farming, he would shake his fist at the sky and curse God. He would have up on his barn a pentagram and something that went like this: Jesus died. Now, as Christians, we know that Jesus is very much alive. But to Vern, he knew that too. And the only thing he was fixated on was mocking God and promoting his hatred of God. My grandmother got that job and began cleaning the house, and she noticed something right off the bat that was strange. The daughter's name was Fairy, after the mythical Celtic creatures. In fact, if you want to look up something about them, just Google it. She never said anything else about the daughter named Fairy, but she did say occurrences were in that house that was very strange. The upper rooms had no windows, and they were painted black. And she said that instruments, particularly a trumpet, would float in the air. Now we know that the devil was, before he fell, a musician of sorts. He played music for God. But I'm not about to give any credit to the devil. Just know that a trumpet shouldn't float in the air all by itself. Now my grandmother became spooked. She told her father she didn't want to work there anymore, and he obliged, and understanding the situation, he said, "I won't make you work there anymore." But that wouldn't be the end of the story. You see, Vern Nolan would die a short time later, and he would die the way of many middle-aged men, of a heart attack. But his actions leading to the action of the heart attack occurring tells me that it was no normal heart attack. In fact, God might have pulled his card because of the annoyances of it. Vern died on his kitchen floor, pounding his fists on the floor and cursing God. Now, I'm no expert, of course, but it's very safe to say Vern got his condo in hell. I don't have one doubt about that. Of course, after he died, the farm would switch hands, and his wife and his daughter is lost to time. But what isn't lost to time is the continuation of the occurrences in that home. There would be two young contractors come to work on that home, and for whatever reason, they had decided that they will stay at the home until it's completed. I'm led to believe that it just needed some internal furnishings, but overall the structure was strong. And these two contractors would sleep upstairs in the windowless rooms. I don't have a reason why they did that, they just did. And as they stayed there for a few nights, one would become convinced that the other was tickling his feet in the middle of the night. Now, of course, I'm sure this caused fights, as a grown man doesn't want to be accused of something as preposterous as tickling another man's feet in the middle of the night. It continues. After a few incidents of this feet tickling, both men would find their boots outside on the front porch, outside the front door. This spooked them. They left, and rumor has it they never returned. But the stories certainly don't end there. 20 years later, there would be a young couple in the area go past that house, And the events they described, even being 30 years from the onset of the occurrence, would match each other without either one being in any proximity to the other. See, this young couple was Robin and Mark, my mother and my father. Now, Robin and Mark were horse enthusiasts. Although Robin liked the horses a bit more than Mark, he was more into motorcycles and motocross, he obliged because horseback riding can be fun. We can all agree to that. And they took these horses past Vern Nolan's farm. But when the horses began to pass the property, they went rigid, their legs stiffened, their heads shot up, and their ears shot back. Any person familiar with livestock knows that the ears shooting back and getting stiff and rigid in the body proves that something isn't right. And at that moment, the wind began to blow, and it blew so strong that the trees bent over, and the tops of the pine trees touched the ground. Now, that in itself doesn't really mean anything, right? It could be a storm, it could be a fluke occurrence of some exchange between hot and cold air. But what makes it all so significant is the fact that both parties, my mother and my father, would say the wind was only blowing on that plot of ground. Meaning Vern Nolan dedicated that farm to the devil. And that's something very scary. I'm not saying that there's a portal in Indiana somewhere, but I'm saying it's a good possibility. Now, my mother and father would divorce close to 30 years ago. And the thing is, after 30 years, their stories would match to the T, proving to me at least that that event definitely occurred. Those trees blew over. Those horses spooked. And they saw paranormal activity. Now, I got myself in trouble with paranormal activity too. I'll make no qualms about it. I got in too deep and my home became very haunted for a time. Maybe something kind of on par with Vern Nolan's. But the only difference between me and Vern Nolan is the fact that I accepted Jesus Christ as my King, my Lord, and my Savior. And these paranormal attacks of levitation, and night terrors, and tragic events would all taper off. So there you have it. The devil was, at least for a time, residing on a farm in Indiana.